the Institute for the Study of Peak States presents the 4th International Psycho-Immunology and Psychobiology Research Symposium. In this video today, Being Human is a Spectrum Disorder, Beauty Way versus Normal Consciousness by Dr. Kirsten Lykkegaard.
So our next speaker is Dr. Kirsten Lykkegaard, the Director of Research at the Institute. Kirsten is a Doctor of Veterinary Medicine and also holds a PhD in pharmacology. For over 19 years, she has contributed to fundamental biomedical research within the somatic pain, obesity, and type 2 diabetes areas. As Director of Research at the Institute, Kirsten's current focus is on developing effective psycho-immunology treatments for specific viral and bacterial diseases. She is also investigating the causes of diseases of unknown etiology, such as autism. Today, Kirsten's here to speak about being human is a spectrum disorder, beauty way versus normal consciousness. Over to you, Kirsten.
Thank you. I would like to start with a story. So some years ago, a couple came to our office, and actually the wife was dragging the husband, and because she was really worried. Her husband had the worst childhood you could imagine. And yet, she said, he's happy and like going on with life as if nothing. And so she was worried that he was actually suppressing really severe childhood trauma. So we looked over at the guy, and he kind of shrugged his shoulders, and he said, yeah, well, maybe she's right. I don't know. And so we asked him to tell us about his childhood, and he remembered everything. And he said that his parents abandoned him when he was a little kid, and so he grew up in the slum streets of a big South American city, and he had no place to go, no home, no shelter, no food, no clothing. You can just imagine what life that would be. And so he stumbled along, and one time he became a child prostitute to make his way, and he got by, and he had lots of bad experiences along the way where everyone would agree that would have been really, really traumatic. And finally, he made it as he grew up, and he made it his way to the United States, and he managed to find a job, and he eventually married this wonderful woman, and now they were sitting in our office. So we ran a couple of tests, actually quite a number of tests, and did some diagnosing, and the fact was that this guy had no trauma, really. I mean, nothing in his past was giving him any traumatic markers in the present. So let's take a look at what trauma really is. So simply said, it's a stuck emotion. It's from the past, but we think that it's in the present. So let me repeat that. It's a stuck emotion. That means it's an emotion that you can't just shake off. And it's pretty strong and has more to do with the past than the situation that you're in. So it's flushing up the past. And what we know about trauma is that and other problems cause emotional reactivity, meaning that you overreact in the present moment. We also know that the amount of emotional reactivity that we have in the present moment affects our mental health and well-being in a sort of, if we take a look at that emotional reactivity as a marker of mental health, this is a plot of the population distribution of the almost entire human population. So at this end, we have high emotional reactivity. And if we are at this end, we all know that if we're emotionally reactive, it's really hard to concentrate and do stuff. Whereas if you're in this end, where you have low emotional reactivity, so pretty good mental health, it doesn't get in your way. You're actually quite high functioning and can get a lot of stuff done. So as you can see, we call this actually normal consciousness. What most people share, this commonality of emotional reactivity with very high here and very little here. So a spectrum, you can say, hence the title of this talk. So let's take a look at what's actually under this curve. What is the characteristics besides this emotional reactivity? So again, the next slide is the characteristics, and it's a spectrum. So some people have more of it, some people will have less, but we all share it. So one of the biggest thing is that having negative emotion, there's a tendency when you're in normal consciousness to focus on negative rather than positive. Also a tendency to, once you are reacting, that you believe your own feelings and that you're almost never completely peaceful. You may think that you are, and maybe you are, but a lot of people that we encounter when they heal traumas and actually maybe for the first time in their life experience true no reaction in life. It's very overwhelming, or it's a good experience. It's like, wow, I didn't know I could be this peaceful. So we also tend to create drama that fits our emotional state in normal consciousness. Like if you're sad or if you're angry, we look to our outer circumstances to explain why we're having this reaction. And that can lead to either we blame ourselves or we blame others, or we're just very upset, or it's not very pleasant. The other thing is that we look outward for advice, like we care about what other people think, or we don't know what to do because we're afraid to upset other people, or so it can be all kinds of things. But looking outward, that is part of the reactivity. And there is a subconscious, constant underlying fear that, because it's subconscious, we're not quite aware of. Sometimes we are, and sometimes we're not. So again, this is a spectrum. And another way of looking at it, because this normal consciousness and the reactivity can give us the fear that comes along with it, you can look at it as, how does it affect our comfort zone? So on this scale is fearlessness, meaning up here there's hardly any fear, if at all, and down here there's less tolerance to fear. So a person with a low functioning will have a narrower comfort zone. And if you have goals that are within that level of fear that you can tolerate, then you can attain them. But if you have something that lies outside of this comfort zone, it's more imaginary or a dream. Whereas a higher functioning person will have a wider comfort zone and can do more in life, as I described. So in the Institute, we have really examined this normal consciousness state and also the biology background for it. And what we've seen is that conception doesn't go right. That's actually the cause of this state of being. This is a very vulnerable moment. We have the egg here, we have the sperm approaching. There's a huge amount of trauma in most people, and there are lots of pathogens around that exploit this moment. And as we know, sperm and egg, they do merge because we do get born. And so everything is good there, except that there are parts of us that do not merge. And because of this unmerged self, you can say we're always looking for the other half, creating a looking outward experience in all of what we do. And when we do that, we are actually corrupting our mental health and getting emotional reactivity by 3 mechanisms. In this talk here, I'm talking about trauma. But there are 2 other things that can give emotional reactivity that we work with in the Institute. That's enough for a different talk, these 2 items here. So let's stick with the trauma load here. So in summary, that is a split inner self that is creating this drama, you can say, or this suffering that we have as humans. So if we take a look back at our South American guy, he did not experience trauma. It's a phenomenon that has been observed but not really well understood in conventional models of psychology. It's described as invulnerable children. And the baseline of this is that these children, they grew up with abuse and neglect, and yet at the same time, they are pretty unaffected as children. And as they go into adulthood, they actually can create they thrive as adults. They have good lives. They do what they like in life, whether that's a high-end job or just a job that they're happy with. But the fact is that they thrive. And so how do we explain this? So let's take a look at it from the Institute model perspective. So that brings us back to this curve here. So we have normal consciousness, and you can say this is how we see this model, and what is usually understood, that if you're at the high end here, you would think that that's where we find some of these invulnerable children. And that is actually true, that if you're really up high here and you go through an abusive childhood, you would get out of that childhood pretty well. You'd only have reactivity once in a while, but most of the time you're pretty unaffected. So an invulnerable child could be in this category. But what is not really understood in normal models of psychology and what creates great mental health is that there is a group of people that's all the way out here, and they're experiencing the world totally different because they're in what we call trauma-free peak states of consciousness with zero reactivity. And I've described put two states in here, so the optimum relationship and the beauty way state. And what we found was that the South American guy, he had all the markers for being in beauty way. And you can't really experience or understand what it means to be in beauty way from normal consciousness, because if you follow this curve to get to the beauty way, it's not a continuum along this axis and boom, all of a sudden you get there. If you get more and more of something, no, this is a jump from there to there. So you can observe people in beauty way, like the wife observed that he was happy and that he was not having the load that she would expect if you're down in normal consciousness over in this group. So it's like a how to say this? It's really hard to imagine or experience if you haven't had it. So the jump is just too far. But let's take a look at what the characteristics of being in beauty way actually are. So again, you are intrinsically positive. So again, if you compare to the other being in normal consciousness, which was negativity was the dominating. In beauty way, you do not react to emotional trauma, and trauma does not get triggered in the present or in memories. So like the South American guy, he had all the memories of it, but there was no triggering from them. So he's like, yeah, that was not good. And then you go on with life. And so if you think about people in beauty way, I mean, they can have lots of things. They have crap happening to them. But for example, a person in beauty way who gets say a really bad diagnosis and feel crappy, physically, they still feel intrinsically positive. So, and you would see that if we go through the list here, that because they still feel alive. So beauty way people feel alive, their surroundings feels alive. That means table, chairs, I mean, of course, plants and everything else, but even things that are stationary, like a table or chair, and colors and sounds are more vivid, meaning everything looks beautiful. But it's this feeling of aliveness that is truly the dominating and makes it really worth living when you're in this state. You're fully present, so you're not like drawn to the past or the future. This means that a lot of beauty way people can actually be caught up in the present, and they have a harder time relating to calendars and time as normal consciousness people. You look to yourself for guidance instead of in the other state where you look outward. So in this case, you have a sense of knowing inside of you. So you just kind of feel inward when you want to make decisions. And then I think this one is one that most people can recognize. So here's a marker that you can get a feel for what it would be like. Remember those summer vacations as a kid where you had just no obligations and no baggage with you, and it was very peaceful, and you were just happy to get up in the morning, excited. that's kind of what it feels like every moment of a person's life in Beauty Way. So if you think back on my comment on if you get sick or if you get other things happening, these things are still present. So it's hard to really get caught up in the drama of things when they do go wrong. There's no underlying fear. And the other thing is that a person in Beauty Way don't have this restriction on thinking what do other people think. So they actually go out and do things in life that they think is important. So if a person feels that it's important to grow garden vegetables in their own garden, they would do that very vividly with passion. And so they do their job very passionately, but what they do is not socially imposed on them. And so you might not see them as, the people seeking attention and like musicians or actors. I mean, they could be if that's what they really want to do, but it's not what calls them this attraction to attention, for example. So if we take a look at their comfort zone, it is totally sort of non-existing. It can spread anywhere because there is no underlying fear. So as a Beauty Way person, you're able to do things very easily. So the biology behind it is that conception goes right. So here again, sperm and egg, and when they merge, they fully merge. And because of that, you look inward. Everything's complete. You're not looking for anything from the outside anymore. And so mental health is optimal because no longer you're looking to these three mechanisms for any guidance in life. So in summary, we can say that most people's mental health can be described on a spectrum that ranges between poor and excellent. People with excellent mental health are high functioning, but even they suffer occasionally because they share the common feature that we call normal consciousness. A small group of people have exceptional mental health that cannot be understood unless experienced and cannot be explained by conventional psychological models. And these trauma-free states of consciousness are characterized by a lack of any emotional suffering as well as an absence of other problems. So maybe I didn't emphasize that enough. It's not just that you gain these aliveness and a positive, but it's also that things fall away, say that coping mechanism that we all have to do in some ways if we have some traumas that we haven't healed, and also some dysfunctional behavior, that all falls away when you get into Beauty Way. So it also leads to the presence of sensations and feelings that are never experienced in normal consciousness, like the aliveness and sound and vividness. And the conventional psychological models fail to explain trauma-free states of consciousness. And that can be seen as an example. The invulnerable children, seen from our perspective, can either be in the high-functioning group of normal consciousness, or they can be in the trauma-free state of consciousness where they will be functioning even better. So what can we do about it? Well, everybody in normal consciousness is suffering. And because when we're in the normal consciousness, being at the high end feels like heaven, but it's actually still seen from a Beauty Way perspective like being in hell. But it's only because you know that heaven is even better. I'm using these terms, but it's not any religious meaning behind it, but it is actually the concept is so far from each other that it's hard to imagine. Either if you've had Beauty Way your whole life, you don't know what it's like to be in normal consciousness, and vice versa. The problem is that we do not know yet how to get people into Beauty Way. So what can we do to improve life from a normal consciousness perspective? There are a few simple practices that can help. One is if you practice gratitude, life starts flowing more easily, and that's because gratitude, there's only positivity in gratitude. So once you start doing that, you actually your focus starts going towards positive, and that spreads to all parts of your life. So you're not actually focusing on one part or another. It actually has impact on all your life if you start doing that. The other way is to follow joy and excitement, and these can go hand in hand. If you do that, and I'm not talking about the joy or excitement about, another piece of cake or a drink or watching a good movie. It can be very simple. But what is characteristic about the joy and excitement I'm talking about is that sometimes it doesn't make sense, or actually a lot of times it doesn't. But if you do follow that, it could even be just simple as call a friend. Right now, I get really excited and feel like that's what I should be doing. It puts you in more optimum alignment with your purpose, and it temporarily turns off fear, so it widens our comfort zones. So as you do this, you would start feeling more of that happening in your life, and life starts being in synchronicity. It's like you're being carried a bit, or there's some outer force that is you're in contact with. So those two are really good and very simple, practical ways. There are other conventional methods, but I also just want to say that trauma healing there are actually a number of effective trauma healings available now, starting from the mid-1990s. Before that, it was nearly impossible to get rid of trauma. Say you had PTSD. That is now possible to do something about. So if you do trauma healing, and especially if you do them on some of your big issues, that can really improve quality of life. Still, Beauty Way is a whole different ballpark. But trauma healing can also lead to a wider comfort zone if the right traumas are healed, meaning now you can start doing more in life, you're freed up. So it moves you in the right direction, which is up on this scale towards less emotional reactivity. But what we really in the Institute want to do is to put people into Beauty Way. That is the goal of the Institute. And if you think of us as that is our mission, by doing this or researching this, we have come up with so many techniques, not just, regular trauma. Actually, they boil down to trauma healing, but they might have other things involved in that improves the mental health in normal consciousness. It's almost like the Moonshot project, where putting a man on the moon made a lot of discoveries, like memory foam and baby formula and solar cells. Same way, we have invented a lot of trauma healing techniques that can help normal consciousness. So just finish the talk with saying that, yes, the mission of the Institute was founded to bring people from normal consciousness into the state of Beauty Way. And spin-offs from this research have solved a lot of problems in normal consciousness. But we really want to nail that. So cross your fingers, we are still working and we have good hopes. So with that, I will take questions. Thank you.
Okay, that was great. Thank you, Kirsten. There are some questions from the audience. So Evan's asking, given there's no process to the Beauty Way state yet, is there a way to experience it temporarily?
Oh, that's a good one. We don't have a reliable way of doing that. So I would say at the moment, no, that is not a possibility that we know of.
Okay. Christian's asking, there are authors claiming that they got Beauty Way after a period of trauma or abuse. Are they just lucky with the genes they inherited?
So if you think of getting a peak state as healing trauma in a specific moment, that's what our model says. And that once that moment is free of trauma, then you gain access to that experience of that particular state. For Beauty Way, there's something else going on as well, but you can say some of the similar things count. So if you are born with less trauma in the moment that counts, like I showed the conception moment, it could have influence on that happening for certain people, and that they're just luckier than others. But I don't for sure know. It's more hypothetical.
Okay. So what about the need for an intimate relationship? Is that trauma-based?
Ooh. That's a wide question. I would say it depends. It really depends. So is the need a positive one, or is the need one where you're trying to solve a problem in yourself? I think that it's definitely a mixed bag. And if you think about relationships in general and how many problems that there are in relationships, I'd say that there's a bunch of traumas that have impacts on our choice of partner and relationship in general. But there's no yes or no to that one, I think.
Okay. Given one of the ways you recommended was to follow excitement and joy if you're in the normal consciousness range, does education for children need to evolve to help them follow their excitement and joy?
That would be wonderful. I would say that there are probably already I think the best teachers out there they are doing that somehow, because once you get kid into tune with that, I think the kid opens up and it starts flowing. So that would be a good teacher in the first place. I think it takes knowing it yourself to actually be able to teach it, though. So I think it would be great if we could do that. But I think the problem would be that not everyone is. We need to educate the teachers first, or have them experience this, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But it would be awesome. Yeah.
I agree. Okay, you're saying, so if someone gets beauty way, and let's say they're in a relationship and the other person isn't in beauty way, will they become closer or more distant in the relationship?
I don't think that you can say that ahead of time. I think it depends on the dynamic that is, or the person who's not in beauty way, how reactive they actually are, because it might be challenging actually. A person, as you saw with the South American couple, I mean, they seem to be thriving together, but still the wife couldn't quite understand the husband, right? I mean, she had to be educated into why he was not reacting. I think the not reacting can actually be challenging for a person in normal consciousness to be with, depending again on that person's level of reactivity and lots of other things. So it definitely would help if both had beauty way.
For sure. Okay. One last question. Butaway sounds like a positive psychedelic trip. So have you observed psychedelics triggering Butaway?
Well, first of all, I'd say psychedelics would not give the qualities that Butaway have, because if under psychedelics, you would not be highly functioning, and in Butaway, you are highly functioning. And I would also add that psychedelics most likely will have the opposite, that you will have a lot of trauma evoked that you cannot handle. That's definitely casualties that we have seen in the Institute seeking help. But that being said, we also know of one example where actually a person did go into beauty way. Had no idea again, was that a person who was already with a very low trauma load in that moment and was able to do something that worked. So don't do it, I would say. Don't seek it as an option, because it's much more likely that it will end bad. So
okay, thank you very much, Kirsten.
That was good.
Yeah, that's all the questions that I have from the audience. So thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching. For more information, please visit www.pigstates.com.